Can anyone train hard? 100%. And after watching this video, your workouts will instantly be tougher. So let's start with the most important factor, eliminating all junk volume. Don't even include a speck of it. Make your sessions as efficient as possible, which means that for 9 out of 10 of you, dropping volume is the easiest solution, usually by at least 1 set per exercise. So if your average is 3 sets of this, 3 sets of that, why not try 2 sets? A simple reduction that doesn't change much in your workouts, but can make all the difference. I'm not suggesting to hit 1 set per exercise Mike Mentzer style, but rather to get the most out of least. This way, the sets that you do perform feature maximum intensity. You don't have a choice because there's such a limited amount of numbers to focus on. You're more likely to push for PRs because you're not dragging things on. If you're doing 5 sets per exercise, or even worse, 10 by 10 German volume training, do you honestly think that the majority of those sets will be anywhere close to failure? No, it can't be. You might be at 50 to 60% with 3 to 4 reps in reserve. Now, that will grow you, but it's not efficient. And before someone chimes in and says, well, isn't volume the driver of growth? The more sets, the better. No, it's not. It's mechanical tension. What matters are the effective reps. So if you're leaving all these reps in reserve, you compensating by doing more sets is exactly that. So the only benefit we could potentially talk about is lowering fatigue. But I'd argue, all things being equal, it's not that different. Plus there's the repeated bout effect, which means that you actually adapt to higher levels of intensity. And I really want to point out that the studies you do see are flawed by design because they're using shorter rest intervals, which we know is compromising multi-unit recruitment and is done on trained lifters who can apparently do over 20 sets of body part to failure. I call BS. That's called the impossible workout. And when we look at one of the major players supervising these studies, his definition of failure is not momentary muscular failure. So if we're talking about technical failure, yes, the more sets the better. But if you can't move a couple of inches, gun to your head, you're done. You can't do as much volume as what's being claimed. You can't. I can't do it. And my work capacity is insane. So if you're truly going balls to the wall, you have to be very selective with your exercise selection. In my case, it's 3 compound movements, 2 isolations. So 6 sets for the compounds, 4 for the isolations. Done twice a week. That's it. But you see how much I grind. I can't do over 20 sets of that. Are you kidding me? Even when I'm bulked, 200 pounds, bear mode, I'm not able to under any circumstances. I will burn the out. And this is how it is for anyone who's actually going to failure. Otherwise, if I'm wrong, prove it. Film your workouts where each set was true failure and you're doing well over 20 sets. I want to see that. We're not going to see it. So if you want to train hard, by default, you cannot have a high volume program. It will need to be on the low to moderate side, and proximity to failure will dictate what that sweet spot is. So I typically recommend 0 to 2 reps in reserve. This is in a hypertrophy context. For strength, I'd actually increase it to 1 to 3. But for pure mass, 0 to 2. And obviously, if it's 0 all the time, you're gonna have to drop the volume even more. So if your intensity is maxed out, it might not be more than 4 to 6 sets per workout. So you can get away with a lot less volume than you think. And over time, I'm starting to connect all the dots. So there's always a natural trade-off. The more you push yourself, the less you can do. And on that note, I want to talk about rep ranges, because now you're dealing with other factors beyond just the slowing of contraction speed. Cardiovascular conditioning, the burn, pain tolerance. You know how it is. If I told you to do 15 to 20 rep squats, we know for an absolute fact that hypertrophy would be equated in the legs, provided that you take that set close to failure. But how much harder is it compared to a 5 rep set? Any powerlifter will tell you that high repetitions are a living nightmare, so they actively avoid it. Plus, it just so happens to be specific to the sport by going higher intensity. But in a general context, the idea that lifting heavy is somehow more fatiguing than high repetitions is completely untrue. In many cases, there's more central fatigue being generated, not to mention technique breakdown. And for axial loaded motions like barbell back squats, that in itself provides a battery draining effect. So it gets even more complex when dealing with highly technical braced movements. I suppose we can make one-to-one comparisons if it's machines. So if you're doing sets of 8 versus 15 on a hack squat, all right, pretty similar, but still there's what I mentioned earlier. And so as a general rule of thumb, if you want to minimize the fatigue, get straight to those effective reps, which is what actually matters for growth, I would stay in the 5 to 10 rep range. That is your sweet spot. And it's what I stayed in the entire time in getting to my 405 bench. Remember, the evidence is clear that reps of 5 all the way to 30 provide equal gains. But you tell me what's most common in a hypertrophy program. The low or high extreme? We all know the answer. And regarding joint stress, because that's another argument, if you use correct form, a controlled tempo, overall refrain from ego lifting, then a set of 5 done the right way is not going to f you up. If it is, you're the problem. And by the way, emphasizing lower reps applies to all muscles, not just for the big compound movements. You can do this on curls. Why not? When you're doing your dumbbell curls, get reps of 5 to 8. What's the problem with that? You can do this on tricep pushdowns as well. The only times where it becomes problematic is for motions that have a really bad strength curve, like standing dumbbell laterals. In that case, I can understand why you might not want to go stupid heavy. But for at least 80% of the most common exercises, you can probably cut your rep range in half and get the same results while immediately unlocking higher intensity for those sets. Because it gets hard fast, not leading up to that point where you're already mentally and physically exhausted. So you want to eliminate all constraints that don't naturally improve intensity, which also means exercise selection is important. There are specific motions that automatically force you to strain your life away. Typically machine-based that has a safety mechanism automatically built in, and it's fully stable, but it doesn't have to be. As long as the strength curve is balanced or it's peaked towards the end ranges, so you're emphasizing the short position, then it should be pretty easy to go hard from even the first rep. There's an incentive to either be explosive or grind through sticking points that otherwise wouldn't be there. So the best example I can give you is the chest crusher exercise. This is a home pec deck that uses industrial springs, and it's designed to make you squeeze your pecs at the end, like you're doing a most muscular pose. I have found that even if I'm trying to high rep it, from the moment I even start bending, it already looks like I'm about to have an aneurysm. From start to finish, it is difficult. Like if you try lightly forcing on that thing, you might not be able to budge it, even though you're far away from failure. Or you might reach a sticking point that was mentally based. In other words, if you're just taking a couple deep breaths and then force really hard, you would have gotten that repetition. And that makes you reflect on all the other exercises where you prematurely gave up. You're learning the skill of pushing beyond your so-called limits. And the best part is, you didn't even need to use higher percentages or max out, because that's actually the best way of doing so, and it's how I got to this level. But no longer is this required if you find the right exercise. I'm not here to list a bunch of them. You can experiment, but if you find those little gems, include them on the regular, and it's going to set you up for when you're not doing naturally intense movements. You're going to make them intense with your newfound expertise. And the other best thing I could say would be to use Accommodating resistance, which I know a lot of guys don't want to hear that, but it's about pushing up the deceleration curve. This way, where advantageous joint angles come into play, you now got to grind more. So there's proportionally more straining reps throughout the entire set, rather than you hitting a wall and then you're done. You can oftentimes go beyond. And if you're not going to use bands and chains on barbells, you can also incorporate them as a drop set. So if you're doing dumbbell lateral raises and feel like you had a bit more juice left to squeeze, but you don't want to do cheat reps or little partials in the bottom, then stand on some bands and get a couple more grindy reps that way. So you also need to differentiate between sticking points and actual failure of the muscle. Or what if you could grind if you were to get past a couple of inches? Well, now you can do stuff like force reps. So turns out gym bros might have been onto something. It's all you. But no, seriously, if you're doing one arm curls, you can self-spot. If you're doing bell squats with your arms out in front, you hit failure and then grab onto the handles, bang out a couple more. Push that set till there's nothing left inside. And of course, when you do this, always maintain pristine technique instead of jerking out of the uncomfortable position, because that's not teaching you how to train. That's teaching you how to be a fucking ego lifter. So when the set gets hard and you want to keep pushing it, you need to embrace the torture that is incoming. Don't avoid the worst positions. Grind through them. When you're curling, don't swing your hips or raise your shoulders all the way up. Lightly unbend your arm and then start to grind. So we want to be both controlled and explosive at the same time. This is not dynamic effort. You're not training for speed, but you are trying to maximally force, even though that might seem like a contradiction. So the secret to amping up those sets is staying mentally focused. You commit to the pain and you don't give in to advantageous cheating techniques. And the best part is you'll get to those effective reps much sooner instead of grinding out a couple bad ones just because you want a new PR. Forget about that. Do the exercise right. And it's also gonna make it easier to track what's actually going on. Honest progression is what guarantees honest effort. It's that simple. So when the set is approaching the end, try to stay level-headed. Believe in yourself, take a couple deep breaths, make ugly faces if you need to, and grind without compromising technique. I cannot stress this enough. This is how all the top naturals who train hard do it. They are not throwing weights around. If you watch enough of my workout videos, my B-roll, if you watch Jeffrey Verity Schofield, Jeff Alberts, OG Bugenhagen, you understand that it's all a mindset. So I think it's important to have role models that show you how to do it right. Back then, there was only Dorian Yates with his blood and guts training, and that was on the extreme end, such that most couldn't even replicate. But now we got honest guys who are showing what's possible. So examine those sets like a boxer who's trying to study his opponent. Learn, apply, and you'll realize that anyone can do this. This has nothing to do with genetics. Zero. It's purely experience-based. And the easiest shortcut is just trying to copy what we're doing. You'll see that it's a lot more replicable than you once thought. Like, I'm nobody special. The fact that I'm able to grind like that, like Jeffrey does the same thing on a same level, if not slightly higher. So I just wanted to mention that. Try to make your sets look like our sets, and you'll be well on your way to training hard for long term. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on effort. Let me know what resonated with you most and what additional tips you can provide. And I'll see you in the next video.